Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Bonnie Lake Chamber Collective Zooming into Success series. I'm your hostess, Dr. Danielle Lord, and I'm joined today with Charity, also from the Chamber Collective, with a much more active role today. So welcome, Charity, and glad to have you as a partner in this conversation. So if you have not done so, give our channel a like and subscribe so you get updates as to when we have new informational videos coming out. This is part of our Zooming into Success series for our chamber members. Of course, you don't have to be a chamber member to listen in to the many insights that we bring from a lot of the folks who are active members within our own chamber. So today you get Charity and I. So welcome, and we're still getting some folks joining in. So we're just gonna pop those folks in. All right. So what are we talking about today? We are talking about the top 10 mistakes employees make when hiring their first employers and employees. So Charity has a long history and background in human resources. Charity, do you want to say anything as we get started here?
Yeah, that'd be great. So thank you so much. And thanks to everybody who was able to join us live and then people who are able to be joining us online later. I'm really excited to be able to provide some basic insights for folks who might be thinking that they're in a position to hire their employee, or maybe are managers responsible for doing that at a smaller organization. So just want to kind of provide some insights and tips so that you can avoid the pitfalls of these mistakes that happen when employers often do hire their first employee. So my background in human resources started in 2003 when I was a kind of operations manager at a startup software development company in Bellevue, Washington. And we were making the Nancy Drew mystery game series. And that was very exciting to be a part of and to be able to support them operationally. And in that role, I took on the responsibilities that often come with that was human resources, in addition to the sort of other activities that I was doing, kind of started my pathway down into that kind of field. And from there, I grew to working with larger multinational organizations, managing international HR a little bit, but really specializing in employee benefits and compensation management until I became a solo entrepreneur in 2014. So that's kind of my history with human resources. As you can tell, it's been a while since I was actually actively working in that role. But as an entrepreneur, I was also hiring all my own employees and working through all of those details as a small employer. And so I've got that as well, that perspective of trying to make it work and trying to make all the pieces fit together while you're trying to run your business and earn new business, kind of juggling all of that. So I've got some unique perspectives. I'm happy to share some of that with you folks today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. For those of you who don't know my background, my 32-year career, I started a little sooner than you, Charity. My career always has been in the field of organizational development. And most people don't know what that is. Even in the large corporate sector, OD is still kind of an unknown, unheard of profession. But I'd like to think of this as if HR is to accounting, OD is to finance. So we kind of see things at that 30,000-foot level. We usually work on implementing human-centered strategies. We work in the areas of team dynamics, conflict resolution, leadership development, engagement, change management. My background has always been in learning theory, adult learning theory, how organizations learn, and employee engagement and leadership development. So that's kind of where my background is. So one of the things that I do very similar to Charity is I help, I got to get this into the slideshow version here. I help organizations figure out that they need HR, that they need some of these people-centered solutions. Everyone thinks about accounting, everyone thinks about marketing. There's some of those things that folks, when they start a new business, automatically think of. HR is one of the things that they generally don't think about, and they don't understand how employees can either be your greatest asset or your greatest liability. And so Charity and I are going to talk a little bit today about some of those top 10 mistakes and making sure that your team is really your greatest asset. So we're going to cover today job descriptions, employee versus contractor, salary versus hourly, illegal questions to ask when interviewing. How many folks know that there are actually illegal questions? Performance management, background checks, employment records, written policies, values and expectations, and finally, we'll wrap it up with friends and family. So with that, we're going to go ahead and just dive right in. So Charity,
no
job
kidding.
descriptions.
We've really set ourselves up for a lot to go through today. So we'll go ahead and kick that off with job descriptions. This is sort of where I wanted to start because it is the fundamental kind of foundation piece for when you get ready to hire an employee. I almost think you need to spend just as much time here as you do actually starting the process of the hiring, like the advertising piece of it, all of that piece of it. This really needs to be a strong focus of what you're doing. And why is that? Because it sets the foundation for the position itself, for how effective it's going to be within your organization, because you've given the thought to how this role that you think you need sort of fits in with the rest of the puzzle pieces that you're working with, right? It sets expectations for a potential employee. They are learning about your organization. They're learning about your overall corporate tone, how you feel about how things sort of fit in within the organization, how their role would fit in with the organization. It helps people really get a sense of what to expect when they take on this position with you. You can also shorten the hiring process with a very specific, very targeted job description. Something that's vague is going to make your pool of candidates far too hard to manage. So narrowing the focus is the way to get to exactly what you're looking for, kind of in the similar way that you create a target audience for a marketing activity. You're creating sort of a target employee that as you're sort of writing these job descriptions. And then they can help you improve retention because they have given you, again, a strong base of what you expect and then the employee expects, aligning those expectations along that job description. And then helping you establish what key values are in that job description that you'll be evaluating the employee against later, because it all should really sort of tie in together. So when we look at job descriptions, things like having a clear title for the position. Like a lot of times I think in small businesses, we think like, oh, we need an everybody person. Like I need a ringleader to run my small business. And you think you're being kind of whimsical and fun, and you might call it a circus ringleader, but unless you're out there running like a family circus, it should not be called that, right? It should be more specific to what the title of the actual position does, what your expectations of that role are, and sort of the level of the role. Have a clear job summary so that they know exactly what the purpose is, how they're going to contribute to the bottom line, what their specific role, responsibilities, and duties are. And then it's also really important in that list to include and I know you're going to laugh here, Danielle, but it's the other duties as assigned, right? Or as needed. And that's really important to include because people can hold you to this job description and say, well, hey, it wasn't in there. And that's why having that little sort of line, as disingenuous as it might sound, or you just have to have that in there so that people can, when you do need someone to do something, they can't just fall back on, well, it wasn't in my job description, so I don't have.
And people, I have heard that. Yeah, right. People do use that phrase.
A couple other things I just want to point out are when you are starting to look at job description, you're also sort of starting to think about the target employee that you want to hire. You a lot of times will come up with these qualifications, and that can get you in trouble sometimes because in general, you might think for this role, human resources assistant, I'm going to need somebody who has a bachelor's degree and 4 years of experience, certainly, at least. The reality is that they may not need a bachelor's degree. They may just need maybe a little bit of continuing ed. Maybe they've taken some trade courses. They've taken some courses in human resources at a local technical college. That person might be perfectly qualified for the role that you're doing. So wanting to make sure that when you are considering the qualifications of the role, that you're really thinking those through and not just jumping to conclusions that might not necessarily fit the position or fit the target audience or fit the amount of pay that you can pay for this role, right? So all of that kind of has to link up together. And speaking of pay, in the job description, especially it is a requirement now in Washington State that
Yes.
you list a salary range, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And so that's another thing that you want to be thinking through as you're writing out your job description to make sure that you're legally compliant with all of that. And then the last thing I would think of is working conditions. So what kind of working conditions can this person expect to experience? And I've seen really poorly written job descriptions that say something to the effect of like, I need a strong man who can lift, 50 pounds all day long and not worry about it. It's like, well, that's illegal generally. What we want to emphasize is expectations that are realistic for the role. So if 50 pounds lifting is required, then say, this role, not that the person that you're looking for, but this role requires someone to be able to regularly lift 50 pounds and then leave it at that, so that you're not assigning any kind of gender roles to it. You're not assigning any kind of expectations of that kind of limitations that you're really putting on yourself for being able to hire a qualified candidate, and potentially opening yourself up to liability.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to tell employers that the job description is really the basis of the employee contract, right? That's your contract with your employees. So really make sure that you have everything spelled out that you need to have spelled out. So they can't come back and say, well, it wasn't in my job description. So, or I didn't know I was supposed to be able to lift 50 pounds because all of those, like Charity said, are potential liabilities. So.
Right. So if they have to stand all day, they should know that should be in the job description. You're going to be expected to stand all day, so that, that's something that they can know that they can do effectively or not, with or without accommodation. Right. So that's a whole nother, conversation.
Yeah.
But here we're kind of focusing on some of the basics of the hiring process. So one thing that comes up a lot in my experience, like a lot, is the problem of conflicting employees and contractors. And the IRS actually used to have a 20-point test, probably still does, 20-point test of different expectations that are associated with an employee versus a contractor. But some of those points are kind of summarized in this graphic here. A lot of times an employer will say, hey, I need someone for this role, and I just want to pay like a flat fee, like a lot of these, and I want them to, come in not so often, like a part-time role, and that's all fine. We can define all of that, but when you start to expect them to be a contractor, but then have a span of control, direct control over the work that they perform, that's when you start to get into conflicts with these misclassifications. And it used to be that misclassifications like that could get you in some serious trouble. We'll kind of see how that goes. But the way you pay employees differs, the way that you tax employees differs from contractors. So making sure that you really understand what makes a person in a role that is a contractor versus what makes them an employee is so important. So an employee gets paid by the hour, they get paid a salary. A contractor generally gets a flat fee, often gets a flat fee, or might get paid by the hour, but it has a specific limited term contract for the project. It's not unlimited like an employee. When an employee is hired, it's usually at will employment for an unspecified period of time, whereas a contractor is typically specified for a limited period of time, and then that contract gets reevaluated when it ends. That's one of the things. Contractors are also responsible for their own taxes, whereas an employee does have to contribute towards like Social Security, things like that directly. The contractors generally take care of that during the tax adjudication system. And span of control, it's just, again, back to the span of control. That's really the one where I see employers making a lot of mistakes with regards to crossing the lines between employees and contractors and vice versa. So just making sure that you understand what it is you really need when you're hiring. If it really is an employee that you directly need to control, what are their expectations for work hours, those kinds of things, versus a contractor who generally has more control over their own work, can generally set their own hours, and typically invoices their own, their own billing for that. So do you have anything to weigh in on there, Danielle? I feel like that's a little
Yeah,
light.
no, I would add, particularly around the span of control and that reporting relationship between an employer and a contractor can get really messy just in terms of the human dynamics around it. So oftentimes employees are like, they're not even an employee. Why am I reporting to them? So it just becomes an engagement issue for employees oftentimes. And there's all kinds of weird power plays that can happen, positional power, transactional power, some of those other power conversations that we can have at another time. But it gets a little iffy, and it can definitely cause engagement issues. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can't generally have an employee and a contractor in the same specific role either. That's kind of one of those no-nos as well. So
yeah,
yeah,
that's an entirely different conversation too.
tricky.
Wait, look at all these spin-off conversations we're having here.
Yeah, right.
Spin-off topics, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. There always is. This stuff is it's like an onion. There's always something, another layer to kind of unwrap and get to.
Yeah.
So here we're talking about how small employers often can be guilty of misclassifying a worker. Whether they should be a salary worker or an hourly worker. The Fair Labor Standards Act has a whole explanation about what makes someone considered exempt from overtime rules. Those are typically salaried employees. Who are considered non-exempt employees are hourly employees, and which means based on state law, whatever the state law suggests is overtime qualified, because I say state law because it does vary, that non-exempt hourly employee would need to be paid overtime for hours worked over that state limit. So it's important because you can get wage and labor lawsuits basically happening as a result of misclassifying your employees. And there are generally rules like typically on the whole job level, salaried employees are normally a higher level, more professional than hourly. They usually have more flexibility, like they don't usually clock in or clock out. And generally, again, they're paid a salary no matter how many hours they work every week. And whereas hourly employees are paid by the hour. So, but there's more to it than that, I guess. It's really important that they meet the minimum salary requirements. So for instance, I've had people say, oh, I have this person and I want them to do this role that's fairly entry level. And I want to pay them like 23,000. Yeah, I don't have that much. I'm a small business. I'm going to start out 23,000. And I'm just going to pay them salary for that. And the problem with that is it doesn't meet the minimum salary qualifications for that person to be in a salaried position, which means that they must be paid hourly, which means that they would be qualifying for overtime. And so you have to understand what those limitations are so that you can make sure that the role that you're hiring for is slotted in correctly and being paid correctly so that you avoid a wage and hour lawsuit.
Yeah. And, the wage and hour lawsuits, those are not something you want to mess around with. And I've seen this as well, Charity, where people just say, well, I'm just going to come in and make them a salaried employee. Well, it's not a type of thing where you can just put that person into a salaried role so you can abuse them and make them work 80 hours a week. If a wage and salary issue comes up and you take that to the state, at least in Washington State is going to say, just give us a number. And we're going to go back to the employer and we're going to say, this is what your employee has said you owe them. And there's really not going to be a conversation around that. I have seen that happen. So that is really the FLSA is the FSLA is really something that you want to pay attention to. So, yeah.
Yeah, it can really get you in some serious trouble.
Certainly can. Okay, I guess this is my slide, isn't it? There
Yeah.
are actually a lot of illegal questions, and they're defined as those that pertain to candidates in protected class or characteristic. So you have to be really careful, and this even applies from the time they walk into the door. And so it could be, Charity's here, Charity's going to interview. She seems really nervous. And so we're going to be walking back to the conference room, and I'm just going to engage her in some light conversation. Hi, Charity, it's good to see you. Oh my gosh, do you have any kids? You know, yeah, do you
Red
live in the
flag. Yeah.
community? What school did you go to? Oh my gosh, so did I. When did you graduate? Even that
Exactly.
time from walking to the door to the conference room before Charity even sits down to interview, those are illegal questions that you cannot ask. And so there's a list. I compiled a list, and I'll try and add those as a link on the YouTube channel as well. But anything that gets to ethnicity, race, age, even as much as do you own a car, it can be considered a question that is discriminatory. So these are the hours of employment. Can you work within those hours of employment versus do you have a car? Those are very different questions. And even just that subtle change could be considered an illegal question. So any one of these, and actually the list is quite a bit longer from this, but anything that's going to lead that person down a path of giving up something about their protected status is going to be considered illegal. So, and also, yeah, please.
So when did you graduate? So that's kind of a question you would think that if somebody is going into a position to know, hey, if I'm hiring you for this particular, like an engineer, you know, when did you graduate? You can't ask that.
No, you cannot ask when they graduated because it's getting to age. And it could be considered an ageism question.
Well,
so it could
master's degree at 38, so I don't think so. But
yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, you have to be really careful and cautious. And in fact, now even folks, professional resume writers are saying, don't put any dates after 10 years on your resume.
Yeah.
So
it's always been good to remove the year of your graduation, generally from your resume as well.
Yeah, I know, tricky.
It's tricky because I think it's human nature to try to find a way to connect with someone. You want to try to find a commonality, but also, I mean, that lends itself to some potential bias trouble as well. But it's just natural to try to feel, you know, organically get to know someone better. But you've got to pick different questions, you know, you've got to pick questions that aren't potentially discriminatory or that could open yourself up to liability like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, thank you, Charity. And with that, I would say, make sure you have some type of an interview guide. I see a lot of small business owners getting into this work and they're like, well, I'm just going to ask Charity some random questions, and I'll ask Andy some different random questions, and Jody, I'll ask her some even different questions. You have no way to compare apples to apples with that. So make sure for whatever role you have, you're asking the same questions for each candidate, so you get a really good sense of what the comparison is, so that you've got something to base a decision on. And some places even say, you know, a numerical rating is also really important, because now you've got something that is legally defensible, though I've heard even that now is being questioned. So just make sure that whatever you have, you can say, I made a decision to hire Jody because Jody met all of the criteria, versus somebody else who didn't. And if you have no way to show and demonstrate that you're making a comparison across the board, you don't really have a legal leg to stand on. So,
And I always, when I was in charge of managing recruiting for that, a few organizations, we would always create that interview guide. And I actually handed it out to everyone who was a part of the interview, and they had to complete it for everyone. And then we would create that sort of scale. And then that's your defense. That's you actually retain that. All of that, please, you retain all of this as a part of your record, so that if you were ever brought up on discrimination charges or something like that, you literally can pull out a packet that says, no, these are the people there, and this is why we chose this one candidate over this one.
Yeah. 7 years after they terminate their employment, keep those records. So,
Yes, that's true. That's such a
all
long
right,
time.
Charity, what are you going to tell us about background checks and references?
Yeah. So once you think you found the right candidate, how do you then make sure that they are the right candidate, or that you feel like you are doing your due diligence? Because there's certain things that you can do and certain other approaches that you can take that violate their rights, quite basically. So I try to tell people I work with, as tempting as it might be, do not cyber stalk the person that is applying for your position, right? Try not to do a deep dive on their Facebook page or their Instagram to, see who they're liking or what they're doing or how they're engaging, because that can also open yourself up to some potential liabilities. But as a part of their application process, they have to list places that they've worked, right? They have to list, and potentially you might ask them to also include personal references or professional references that you might be able to call later. And a lot of people say like, well, that's just stupid, because I'm not going to list a reference who's going to give say something bad about me. And of course you're not, no one's going to. But that's not really how I use background checks. And that's not how I would encourage you to use background checks. So first, you can check their references. You can check the places that they have worked and listed on their application. The person that you're calling or emailing at that organization is going to give you some very basic responses. They are not going to open themselves up to liability by going into great detail about their performance or why they quit or how that all went down or any of that. They're just going to give you the facts. What was their position? What were the dates of employment? Are they eligible for rehire? Which is a good way to know how that all went down, right? And a legal way to kind of ask that question. If they say no, they're not able to legally get into any more details. You just say, okay, that's interesting, because that employer would not consider this person eligible for rehire. Maybe I go back to that person and talk through that a little bit more if I really think they're a strong candidate, or maybe that's a red flag because I have maybe collected other red flags along the way. So those are helpful, but not super helpful, because I don't think you get a lot out of it. But then you've got these personal and professional references that you may have asked them for. And again, a lot of people don't give them any credence because no one's going to give a bad reference. But what I like to do with them is, if I have a certain concern about this candidate, question about a certain area or a way that I could manage them, like type of management style that they kind of like, or if there's something I'm really trying to glean out of this candidate to make sure that they're going to be a good fit for the organization or a fit for the role, that's where I try to use the personal and professional references. And I just keep it as a casual conversation. And I really keep them uplifted, not as like, I don't do it like I'm really judging their friend or their coworker or their, former employee that they used to manage. I kind of let them know like, hey, this person is a strong candidate for a role that I'm looking for. This is awesome. We're so excited. We really want to look to maybe bring them onto the organization, but I just had a couple of questions, some clarification points, some ways that I think that you might be able to help me do a better job managing them if they were to be brought on to our. So you're never saying that they are going to be an employee. You're just saying that you're considering it. You're still in the process of deciding. And that you're looking for some ways that you can get some insights. And people are usually really happy to give you that. And I've gotten some really great information out of those conversations. So you're collaborating with them, you're helping to hire their friend, hopefully. But in the reality, you're kind of sussing through some of this other information that maybe you had doubts about or that you were curious about. So that's how I use them. Do you have anything to add to that, Danielle?
No, I don't. That was a great explanation, Charity. And yeah, you're right. Employers can't really say much more beyond what Charity mentioned. So, or they're going to put themselves into some kind of legal jeopardy as well. So background checks can get a little bit tricky too. There are lots of places out there who do provide background checks. Jody, probably in the area that you work in, background checks are probably really important. So yeah.
Okay, I don't want to take up too much. I just realized I'm taking up a lot of this time, but it's such good information here.
It's such good, yeah.
So this slide is all about maintaining employment records correctly and legally, so that you aren't opening yourself up to liability. They should be kept in a confidential location that's secured, that not everyone has access to. Essentially, it should be human resources and or at a smaller business level, general managers, owners, very limited access. You should have, at minimum, a separate employment file that has your maybe a copy of an offer letter, things like that. Well, that usually goes to payroll. All your taxes and those kinds of things are usually held in a payroll file. And then your I-9 form is kept separate from your employment records. And the reason for that is so that if someone needed to look up some information about that employee or needed to review their employment record, they could review that without necessarily having access to that person's confidential potential immigration status, potential reasons that you could discriminate against them, basically. And so that's why the I-9 forms are kept in like a super confidential place, usually just alphabetized by last name, so that you can quickly get them if you needed to prove that you had done your due diligence when you were hiring them. And then for the similar reason, you would not keep your medical forms in the same place as your employment records as well, because again, there could be potentially some medical information that would be considered PII or HIPAA data. So keep that separate as well. So you've got a few file folders and a few different varying levels of access for that. So just make sure you're paying attention to it and not being sloppy with your employment records.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, always double lock and key. So with those. So even if you don't have an HR office, you've got your anything, any one of those things, any locking filing cabinet in a space that can be locked in and of itself. Okay, this is probably one of the biggest areas of liability for small businesses. And what's the first thing that the attorney is going to ask for in the event of a legal situation? The first thing they're going to ask for is the copy of your handbook and the copy of any related policies. And if you do not have those, well, I've seen plenty of businesses go out of business because they did not have these documents to produce. So if there's one thing that you're going to get when you're starting out to hire some team members, handbook and some basic policies. Your policy library is going to build over the years as things come up and you're like, oh, maybe we should have a policy around that. So everyone clearly understands what is needed and what's expected. But handbook and a few policies. What are the behavior expectations? How do you engage and how do you interact with customers? How do you engage and interact with other employees? What happens if there is a situation of impropriety? How is that handled? What is your non-retaliation policy? So all of those are really key policies to have. They don't have to be complicated. You can always build them as events come up and situations come up, but these are an absolute must if you're going to be hiring someone. The other thing I was going to say, and Charity, you probably have a lot more that you can add to this as well, but the other thing that I would add to this is once you have made a decision about something based on a policy, it becomes precedent. So you can't say, well, I'm going to apply this policy to Charity, but I'm not going to apply it to Jody. So once you've done it, and that becomes precedent that has to be applied to every single employee.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that really helps with decision making, doesn't it?
Yes. Oh my gosh.
When you say, oh, you're going to do that, so then you're doing it for every person. All right.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I'm working with a client right now. We're actually putting process maps around every single thing that they're doing. And what's nice is every single, where there's ever a policy related to a specific process, it's written, it's right there. The employee can go right to it and say, how exactly am I supposed to do it? But it also takes a lot of the burden off of the employee customer interaction, because if you've got a customer who's saying, well, this is stupid, I don't know why I should have to do this, the employee is like, look, here's the policy right here. I have to follow it. This is what it is. It's all documented. So everybody knows what the expectations are. So anything you'd add to that, Charity?
No, I've so important. And again, the employee handbook is where you put your kind of get out of jail free sentences as well. That's where you talk about your at will employment again. You're
Thank you.
reiterating,
At will employment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
you're reiterating the really important things in there for sure. It's so important.
Yeah. All right. Okay. This is one that is very near and dear to my heart is your organizational values. So you probably, as a business owner, you established your organization based on your own values. And that is actually what becomes your culture. So if people don't know what those values are, they're not going to know the most appropriate way to behave that's in alignment with those values. They also aren't going to understand what the expectations are of behavior. And so the values are really the things that say, this is how we behave. Now, of course, you have to live up to those values as well, or you have a cultural misalignment, which is, again, another topic area for another day. But that's really what sets the behavior of the entire team within your organization. So if we say we have a value of quality, you're probably always in that mind frame of everything we do has to meet a certain quality standard, whether that's behavior or consistency. Think of a McDonald's cheeseburger, right? It's the same quality. Well, I'm using quality loosely here, but it's the same quality of cheeseburger that you would get on your coast to coast trip from Seattle to Boston. Yeah. And so that is a behavioral expectation based on a value. So having those values is really, really important. It also means that you can make hiring decisions based on those values. So you can have values-based questions. We're back to some of those interview guide and interview questions again, but you can certainly have values-based questions. So a lot of people will use that to say, this is an example of how someone behaved in a particular situation. It's likely that they're going to behave that way in a future scenario. So you can definitely build those values into your interview questions. And then the folks that you hire that have similar or share similar values with your organization, they're going to be likely to be much more engaged because they have what's called affective commitment, meaning I'm not committed from my hands or my head, I'm committed from my heart. And so that values alignment is really important in terms of culture and engagement. So they should really be transparent, and they should definitely be a part of your work, how you're rewarding your team members, how you're thanking them, recognizing them, and even promoting them. Because as soon as you promote Sam over here for behavior that was not aligned with your values, you've now created a ripple effect that's going to impact your culture pretty drastically. And then setting expectations. You know, I oftentimes see a lack of setting expectations to begin with, but the other challenge I see oftentimes is, well, I already told them that. I set that expectation on day one. Okay, well, it's day 60 now. There's been a lot of stuff that's come out of the fire hose that you've asked them to drink from in those 60 days. It's likely that they maybe have forgotten. Maybe those values have gotten pushed aside. Maybe something came up or the expectations rather, sorry. Maybe something's come up at home, and suddenly those 7 things that we hold in our brain consistently, that expectation got pushed out. And so it's always a good idea to be reestablishing expectations. So that's one of the things that you cannot do enough, setting and establishing those expectations. And then when we I'll get into that in another slide. But anyway, setting values and expectations, just always important parts of work that I think are often really overlooked. So yeah. Anything you'd add to that, Charity?
No, I completely agree. I feel like this slide is so important. It should have gone even before, before the job description, right? We need to set and establish what those values and expectations are. It's so critical. You're right.
Yeah. One thing I find when I work with folks is they failed to set expectations, and now all of a sudden they feel like they have a bad hire, right? Well, I don't understand why they're behaving this way. Well, you failed to set the expectation, so they're diverting back to what they know. And so that what they know may not be culturally aligned with the organization that you have. So if you haven't set those expectations, you may wonder why you're seeing behavior that is not aligned with what they said they were. Okay, moving on quickly here, performance management. First of all, we have to establish what great looks like, and setting up some really clear understandings of having a well-defined performance assessment is really crucial. I see photos. I meant to pop this photo into the slide and I forgot, but I see these photos of job evaluations, and it's a performance based on like a 1.5 Likert scale. 1 is not good, 5 is great. Okay, but what is great? How do I know? Did I show up with matching shoes today? Did I make the boss feel super good? And so therefore I'm great and somebody else isn't. So really define what great looks like. Again, it kind of goes back to setting those expectations. Using SMART goals, so people are understanding what it is that they're supposed to be doing in ways that they're being measured. Provide clear, specific, meaningful feedback. And give constant feedback. It's a lot easier to make a course correction at 3 degrees than at 30 degrees. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that. The other piece I would say to that is constantly give feedback when you see employees doing things right or the correct way that you would like to be seeing it. That it creates a positive environment, a positive vibe, and people are much more likely to continue doing that behavior because they're getting a dopamine hit. Right? It's like, oh, I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And so you're creating happy brain chemicals. So therefore you're going to have happy employees. If I'm constantly telling you, don't do it that way, don't do it that way, don't do it that way, now it feels like it's a constant punishment. So always be rewarding for what they're doing right and praising them for what it is that they're doing right. And then poor performance conversations at whatever your performance period is, whether it's 6 months at the end of the year, should never be a surprise. Right. If people are surprised by that, you have failed terribly as a manager.
Right.
So.
Right. Performance management is a daily activity, not something that you just save for your annual review time. It really needs to be something that's a part of your management overall. And yeah, I agree. I've had too many conversations with employees where they were confused and they just didn't understand how things had gotten to this point because you know, they weren't getting consistent, clear feedback from their manager as they should on a weekly, daily, as needed sort of basis. And so it kind of the performance review should never come out of left field. I completely agree with you. Yeah.
And just remember too, that employee that Charity just defined is in what we call an amygdala hijack. So they're in a space of fight or flight. And so you're not going to get the best performance from a team member who is in that space of fight or flight. And that extends into the broader community as well, because even if I haven't said anything, the other team members are going to be picking up on that energy and they're going to be wondering what the heck is going on. Something feels off. I can't put my arms around it, but I know that something is off. And so they're likely to end up in a state of anxiety as well.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
And then finally, friends and family. I think this is a big one that I see within small businesses as well. And it's often, and I think it's truly from the heart a lot of times is, oh, this is my friend, my sister, whatever the case is, they need me right now and I've got a spot, or they've been my greatest supporter. So of course I'm going to bring them into the fold as my business grows. As tempting as it is, this is not something I would recommend. And I've seen a lot of this backfire. In fact, I was working with a gal. She was wanting some assistance on how to fire her daughter because they had hired their daughter to manage their business and it went sideways almost from day one. And now you're talking about a damaged family dynamic. Not a third cousin family dynamic, but a really close family dynamic between the husband, the wife, and now the daughter. So, and then there's something in human dynamics called the Hawthorne effect. And that's a special, a place of special treatment, or I have favorable status under what's called the Hawthorne effect. And it generally means that look at what I've done, or I'm doing something better than my colleagues or this individual. And so therefore I have a more favorable status. Sometimes it's stated, sometimes it's implied, but it generally creates a very unhealthy culture. And then we have, or it increases, no, it decreases employee engagement. Why did I put that there? No, it decreases employee engagement when you have someone in this who's got a Hawthorne effect. So another business, I did a little bit of consulting at this business, but this owner didn't want to believe me that hiring his girlfriend was disastrous, because her whole mantra was, well, basically I'm sleeping with the CEO. And so everybody else has to do what I say because of this special relationship that I have with the CEO. So it definitely was not a good scenario for the employees. It created a lot of tension and a real toxic culture. So I would say, if you really are compelled to bring in friends or family, really make sure you've got some tight controls around that and keep an eye on things, because the Hawthorne effect is very real. Research says, yeah, it's a real thing. So, in fact, just recently, they've done some work with a particular type of driver of a particular type of car. And they find that the drivers of this particular type of car believe that they are more privileged than other drivers because they are doing something better for the economy, or not the economy, but the environment. And so there is actually a proven Hawthorne effect around drivers of a particular automobile. So
interesting. So the Hawthorne effect is certainly something that extends more broadly than just this particular example, but interesting. Okay. Human dynamics. I like it.
Yeah. This is my world, human dynamics in the workplace. So the Hawthorne effect. And that decreases employee engagement. So I'll just say that again. Oh, I can't believe I had that little slip. So so there we go. That's it on our 10 top hiring HR OD mistakes that can happen in your organization that create challenges, liabilities, and you don't have to have a liability to have a very disengaged team who is actually actively doing damage in your organization. So
that's true too. That's true too. Well, we hope that this has been helpful information for everybody, and that you're able to take something away from it. We appreciate all your time joining us today. And Danielle, thank you so much for hosting and helping us, kind of talking us through some of those topics. I really appreciate it. I'm excited because we have some fun things happening this month. We're going to be having our State of the City luncheon taking place on March 20th. So if you're not already registered, I hope that you can join us. It's going to be a really good one. We've got Mayor Terry Carter is going to be coming by, and also Public Services Director, Jason Sullivan. So it's going to be awesome. And I hope you can be there. And then I hope you can, all right. I hope you can join us in our April Zoom into Success. So we'll start talking more about that soon.
Yes. All right. Hope to see you then. Thanks, everyone. And if you do have questions, this is a lot of the work that I do. So feel free to reach out to me, and hopefully we'll see you next month. On behalf of the Chamber Collective, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks.